I had been in love with him my whole life. He reminded me very much of my dad. He was my idol.
Whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it. How am I doing?
He's enjoyed this unbelievable popularity with people. He's like Mr. Everyman.
Now you listen to me. I don't want any plastics, I don't want any ground floors, and I don't want to get married ever to anyone. You understand that? I want to do what I want to do. And you're...
You were never really sure if he was doing the scene or not, because he's exactly off the screen the way he is on.
From simple beginnings in small-town America, he has become an international superstar. And his movies have become timeless images of the American way of life. Yet Jimmy Stewart never strayed from the values of his youth. He grew larger than life by being down to earth, playing the everyman as the leading man.
He was the quintessence of the American. If we are not like Jimmy Stewart, we would like to be.
James Maitland Stewart was born on May 20th, 1908, in the comfortable, middle-class town of Indiana, Pennsylvania. The eldest of 3 children, his early years were formed by strong values of family, faith, and friendship. Jimmy's mother, Bessie, was a pillar of the community and active in the Presbyterian Church. His father, Alex, owned a hardware store that was a local institution for half a century.
Alex Stewart was the character-in-chief of Indiana. And, I mean, the story's a legion about his boisterous ways. I mean, this was a man who would go into a bar and say, you know, like, come on over to my house for breakfast tomorrow, and 40 people would show up at his wife's door.
When Jimmy was 6, Alex Stewart was sufficiently prosperous to move to a rambling house overlooking the town, where musical evenings brought the family together in song. Jimmy's younger sisters played violin and piano. Jimmy played an accordion, presented to him by his father.
There were carnivals that came through twice a year in Indiana, and on one occasion, one of the performers was an accordionist. He was down on his luck. He went into Alex's store. He swapped the accordion for some money, and that was the first time that Jimmy Stewart got his hands on an accordion, and it was something that he didn't let go of for the rest of his life.
But in 1917, the family's fun-filled evenings would change dramatically. America was entering World War I, and a Stewart had fought in every conflict since the American Revolution. Alex Stewart was not one to be left behind. Though lonely for his father, the youngster was proud of the Stewart legacy of sacrifice, valor, and patriotism. Family tradition also led to prep school at Mercersburg Academy. And in 1928, Princeton University, his father's alma mater. With his father's approval, Jimmy majored in architecture, and his trusty accordion won him a coveted membership in the Princeton Triangle Club. It was also in college that Jimmy Stewart discovered the theater.
He never had any ambition to be an actor. It was only other people who saw in him something that was quite rare and persuaded him.
By the summer of 1932, Jimmy graduated from Princeton, and his academic achievement earned him a scholarship in architecture. But the real world outside Princeton's ivy-covered walls held little promise. The Great Depression had squeezed America dry, and even with an advanced degree, jobs were hard to come by. Any hope of Jimmy's joining the family business turned to ashes when in 1929, the Stewart hardware store burned to the ground. With few other options, Jimmy took his accordion and headed to New England.
He joined a little theater group up in Massachusetts in the summer of 1932 as a musician. He was quite a musician.
Joshua Logan, an up-and-coming writer and director, invited Jimmy to join the University Players for their summer season. Among the youthful troupe of stock players, Jimmy met two who would become his lifelong friends, Margaret Sullivan and Henry Fonda. In the fall of 1932, the ambitious University Players received the invitation of their dreams. Their summer stock production of Carrie Nation, a play about Prohibition, had been a rousing success, and the producers were willing to mount a full-scale production. The cast included a 24-year-old actor whose small role playing a policeman would suddenly become his big break on Broadway. The Great White Way of the 1930s was home to theater titans such as Noel Coward, London Fontanne, and Helen Hayes. But the University Players would not be in their neighborhood for long. Within weeks of Carrie Nation's opening night, the Prohibition drama seemed about as fresh as yesterday's beer. Franklin Delano Roosevelt won the presidential election and promised to repeal Prohibition. As the nation topped off its glass, ticket sales for Carrie Nation dried up, and the University Players moved out. Jimmy, however, was bitten by the theater bug and remained in New York, moving into a two-room apartment with his friend, Henry Fonda. Between auditions, they hosted the Thursday Night Beer Club, where, for a couple of bucks, Henry Fonda would grill you a hobo steak, and Jimmy Stewart would entertain.
Jimmy would play the accordion, the piano, and Henry would sing along. And, of course, neither one of them could really sing, but they would just have a good time doing that. And they just liked to be together because they could discuss the theater, they could discuss the movies, they had all these things in common.
It was a time of low rent and high aspirations, and a string of small roles rescued Jimmy from eviction, earning him another minor run on the Broadway stage and another week's rent.
And his friend Henry Fonda was almost annoyed that he had to beat the bushes to find work and get parts in plays, while Jimmy Stewart just seemed to amble into a producer's office and get offered a part.
1934 was Stewart's banner year on Broadway. The 26-year-old actor received applause from critics for his moving portrayal of an Irishman in the powerful drama Yellow Jack. There, he caught the eye of a Hollywood talent scout.
Well, he got into Hollywood almost as easily as he got on Broadway. They liked the look of him, and they offered him, a short-term contract to come out and work. And, of course, coming to California in the mid-30s was coming to an entirely different world. This had no relationship to his East Coast upbringing or New York theater.
It was a gamble Jimmy Stewart felt he had to take. For the first time, acting had become the most important aspect of his life. In 1935, Clark Gable was the king of Hollywood. Shirley Temple was America's little darling. And 27-year-old Jimmy Stewart arrived at the Pasadena train station to meet his best friend, Henry Fonda, who had just started his own movie career at 20th Century Fox. The pair moved in together, as they had in New York, and set about dating a different movie star for every day of the week. Fonda already had a reputation as a man about town, and under his guidance, Jimmy Stewart soon caught up.
Stewart and Fonda were double daters. There are stories of Olivia de Havilland, Ginger Rogers, and Loretta Young. So that, in a sense, they were the two studs on the city.
When asked about these love affairs, Stewart would only say, "These women were great dancers, and I love to dance." Now under contract to Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, Jimmy's first assignment was a small role in The Murder Man, starring Spencer Tracy. Only the sharpest of eyes would catch Jimmy in the movie trailer. The all-American boy from Pennsylvania had broken into the movies, and he was about to become a movie star.
What would happen if you didn't take this train?
Why, it wouldn't matter if you wanted me to stay.
Now stay right there. Stay right there.
Jimmy Stewart had met Margaret Sullivan while they were both in summer stock. In 1936, she lobbied the studio brass to cast him as her co-star in Next Time We Love. She also helped him turn his off-screen awkwardness into an on-screen asset.
Sullivan taught him how to relate to the camera and how to use his body. If sometimes it still seemed awkward, then use the awkwardness. And it was obviously generally a sense of teaching him to be comfortable with himself.
I want you to know that well, naturally, I realize that you've been living your own life, and, well, I want you to know that I realize that. Well, what I'm trying to say is that I don't want you to feel that I expect anything of you.
It's very fair of you.
Amid rumors that Sullivan's interest in Stewart went beyond the merely professional, she coached him day and night. But the pair never became a romantic item, at least not in public. Perhaps because Sullivan was once briefly married to Stewart's best friend, Henry Fonda.
And for some dumb, goofy reason, baby, I'm nuts about you.
Next Time We Love created an avalanche of opportunities, and soon Stewart was appearing on screen with Eleanor Powell, Joan Crawford, and Myrna Loy.
The glimmer of the Stewart to come is immediate when you see this guy because he looks different. He speaks differently. He has a different persona. There's something about this guy that is not like anybody else.
Enthusiastic MGM executives saw there could be more to Jimmy Stewart than had earlier met their eyes.
In his case, he was about 6'3" and probably 150 pounds. That's not good on camera. So they wanted to build him up. So they put him through physical exercises. They have gymnasiums there, and they had teachers, and anything that they felt an actor needed in the way of education or development, the studio would give him.
The promising young actor caught the attention of director Frank Capra, who was getting ready to film You Can't Take It With You.
I think my father saw in Jimmy the perfect hero for many of his stories. The person who could come from small town, middle America, sort of everyman, be honest, trustworthy, not very sophisticated, and yet he could rise up to the occasion.
What happened? What happened? What happened? Well, a mouse went right past there.
A mouse in this place?
A mouse? What do you mean a mouse? It was a rat that long with hair on it.
A rat with hair on it?
Yeah, about 6 of them.
Where?
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 Where? Where? Right under that
table. Co-starring Jean Arthur, the film was a runaway hit, earning Oscars for Best Picture and Best Director in 1938. Its success led to a follow-up with Capra, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington.
I think there was a lot of trust between them. My father trusted him. I know he trusted my father. So that when they worked together, there was a very strong bond.
One example of the creative bond between actor and director was this scene, where the idealistic senator must filibuster his jaded colleagues.
If you think I'm going back there and tell those boys in my state and say, look, now, fellas, forget about it. Forget all this stuff I've been telling you about this land you live in is a lot of hooey. This isn't your country. It belongs to a lot of James Taylors. Oh, no, not me. And anybody here that thinks I'm going to do that, they got another thing coming.
With Capra, he found he could share the idealized concept of America and expose the bad things.
Well, that's all right. I just wanted to find out whether you still had faces.
And prove that goodness in the long run works out. And that was the fire under him when he saw in Capra scripts the opportunity to develop a character.
Jimmy went so far as to risk his voice for the sake of realism.
The doctor told him that he could put some kind of tincture of something like merthiolate or something like that, which was used at the time, on his vocal cords. It would irritate them enough so that he would be hoarse.
There's no place out there for graft or greed or lies or compromise with human liberties. And if that's what the grown-ups have done with this world that was given to them, then we better get those boys' camps started fast and see what the kids can do.
The result was an unforgettable performance that earned the 31-year-old Jimmy Stewart his first Oscar nomination for Best Actor. In 1940, Stewart was chosen by Katharine Hepburn to join her and Cary Grant in the Philadelphia story.
But I think it was people like Hepburn who said to him, look, Jimmy, you're capable of much more than you're doing. I want you to play this part. And when she says, I want you, she gets him. And he turns out to be quite wonderful in the part.
What is this, Connor? Oh, easy, easy, old man. She's not hurt? No, no.
Not wounded, sir, but dead.
Seems the minute she hit the water, the wine hit her. Now, look here, Connor. A likely story, Connor.
Hello, Dexter. Hello, George. Hello, Mike.
The part earned Stewart another Oscar nomination for Best Actor in 1940, and ironically put him in competition with his closest friend. Henry Fonda was also nominated that year for The Grapes of Wrath. But to Jimmy, the greatest prize was friendship. When he did win the Oscar, he said, the statuette should have gone to Fonda.
I think he was a little befuddled because he was so surprised to get it. He was not expecting to win. He truly expected Henry Fonda to get the Oscar that year.
If Jimmy's parents had any qualms about their son's career choice, they were now over them. They proudly displayed the Oscar in the window of the family's rebuilt hardware store.
They were very proud people. So to have an Oscar in the window of a little shop in a small town in Pennsylvania was really quite remarkable.
Now 32 years old and handsomely paid by Hollywood, Jimmy owned a single-engine Stinson 105 airplane and indulged his love of flying. In 1940, the idyllic calm of his hometown was once again disturbed by events far away in Europe. Adolf Hitler had begun his evil rise to power. Like millions of other Americans, Jimmy wanted to stop the Nazis. He chalked up flight time in his plane, dreaming of one day becoming a combat pilot. It seemed as if he would get his chance when, more than a year before Pearl Harbor in October of 1940, he was drafted. But there was an obstacle as embarrassing as it was persistent. The angular actor found himself on the light end of the scale once again. Regulations dictated he could not fight until he fattened up.
He really felt that this was something he had to do. So he built himself up, just as he did when he first got to MGM and he had to bring his weight up to par. He did the same thing with the service.
After lifting weights and forcing himself to eat a lot of tuna sandwiches, one of his favorite foods, Stewart met the weight requirement by a matter of ounces. America's everyman was going to war.
When he got into the Air Force, he was good enough as a pilot to be an instructor. He was training bomber crews. And once, of course, he got to England with the 8th Air Force going on real bombing raids. You've got to be a good pilot. He knew exactly what he was doing.
As Stewart risked his life in the flak-filled skies over Germany, he was comforted by the 91st Psalm, a copy of which his father had slipped into his uniform pocket, along with this note. My dear Jim Boy, soon after you read this letter, you will be on your way to the worst sort of danger. I feel sure that God will lead you through this mad experience. God bless you and keep you. I love you more than I can tell you. Dad.
Well, I think the war brought him closer to his father than anything else, because the father realized he had a son in peril. I mean, fathers were losing sons by the thousands every month of that war.
As a pilot and later commander of a bomber wing, Stewart flew more than 20 perilous combat missions. For his extraordinary bravery under fire, he received the Distinguished Flying Cross with Oak Leaf Cluster. May 8th, 1945. The war in Europe was over. It was time to go home. Colonel James Stewart had served 4 years and had received $21 per month, a pay cut of more than $11,000 a month from his wages as a movie star. But every month he dutifully sent his agent a commission check of $2.10. As America breathed a sigh of relief, so did the MGM brass. Their top box office attraction, Jimmy Stewart, was returning unscathed.
When he came back from the war, he had it written into his contracts immediately after the war that none of the publicity could ever refer to his war record. They were parallel existences. They were never to cross.
Well, the actors and other film people who had served in the Second World War, particularly in combat, they came back with very different views about life. It had matured them in many ways. They wanted to come back to pictures that were not as fanciful, something with a greater edge of reality to them.
As Stewart decided what to do next, Frank Capra invited him over to his home to hear an idea for a film.
My father starts to tell him this story, and he says, now you're on this bridge, and you're about to commit suicide, and just before you are jumping off the bridge, a funny little fellow, he jumps in. He goes, oh, gosh, I got to save him. So you go in and save him. And it turns out he's your guardian angel, and he gets about that far, and he says, gee, this isn't very good, is it? I don't know. And Jimmy, of course, said, oh, no, Frank, no, fine, I'll be in your movie about an angel or whatever you want me to be in, I want to be in.
The film would be called It's a Wonderful Life. And for Jimmy Stewart, it would become the most challenging and one of the most memorable roles of his career. Christmas, 1946. It's a Wonderful Life, Frank Capra's first production under his new Liberty Films banner, opens in New York City.
What is it you want, Barry? What do you want? You want the moon? Just say the word and I'll throw a lasso around it and pull it down. Hey, that's a pretty good idea. I'll give you the moon, Barry.
I'll take it.
One of my favorite scenes, dramatically, that anybody has ever done was Jimmy in It's a Wonderful Life when he's praying at the bar. And he's praying for God to save him.
Dear Father in heaven, I'm not a praying man, but if you're up there and you can hear me, show me the way.
Come in, Uncle Billy!
The film's engaging theme of redemption through faith did not prevent its being unfairly branded as a critical and box office disaster.
Contrary to a lot of people's sort of myth, the film did okay. It didn't do great. It did okay. It got pretty good reviews. It was nominated for 3 Academy Awards.
Despite Hollywood's doubts that Stewart could recapture his pre-war screen momentum, It's a Wonderful Life earned the 38-year-old actor his 3rd Best Actor Academy Award nomination.
The print in the concrete at Grauman's Chinese Theater. Jimmy Stewart goes through the ceremony that attends the brilliant success of the premiere of the great new 20th Century Fox film drama called Northside 777.
Call Northside 777 brought a new and tougher Jimmy Stewart to the screen.
But remember this, if I ever catch you lying, I'll blast you so hard you won't even get a parole when you're 33 years old.
But it wasn't until 1949 that he had his first post-war box office hit with co-star June Allison.
I think it was the first time I was ever really completely tongue-tied. I had seen Jimmy in movies, but I had never met him, and he asked for me to do the Stratton story together.
The Stratton story was drawn from the life story of baseball player Monty Stratton, who became a major league pitcher despite having an artificial leg.
Now, come on, put it right in here, right over the plate.
Gee, honey, I'm sorry. You hurt?
No, I'm all right. But you've just lost yourself a catcher.
Cinematic chemistry brewed box office success, and the Stewart-Allison partnership was so credible that many fans were convinced the still single Stewart should have married his charming co-star.
I would get calls, and they'd say, why did you marry that man, Dick Powell? You should have married Jimmy Stewart. And he'd get calls, and they'd say, why did you let her marry him?
But But it was a real-life pairing in 1949 that would put one of Hollywood's most eligible bachelors out of circulation. On August 9th, the 41-year-old Stewart married Gloria Hattrick McLean, a former model from Larchmont, New York. With Gloria came two young sons, Ronald and Michael, from a previous marriage.
She was a classy dame, in the best sense of the word. Probably one of the most beautiful women you'd ever want to meet. And funny, so funny. You could just see the sparks between them.
Within months of their marriage, the Stewarts received news that Gloria was pregnant.
Gloria and I were expecting our children at exactly the same time, and we had the same doctor. As I came around the corner in my car, I saw Gloria crossing the street, and she wasn't looking at the cars, and all the cars were screeching to a halt. And finally, I kind of pulled over to her, and I stopped her. I said, "Gloria, are you all right?" She said, "You'll never believe it." And I said, "What?" She said, "I'm going to have twins."
On May 7th, 1951, the Stewarts' twin daughters, Kelly and Judy, were born.
Well, he came a little late in his life to be the father of infants, but I think it amused him as much as he loved having the kids.
While Stewart wrangled toddlers at home, he often wrangled horses at work, appearing in numerous westerns, including Broken Arrow, co-starring Deborah Paget.
Run, Santeria, run!
Underneath the affable, easygoing guy, there was a man of anger who really could explode, who could be forceful, even vengeful. And he was capable of playing that part.
All deliveries to the rear, please.
What do you mean? I live here!
Oh, why, of course. How stupid of me. You may come in. Careful, don't get trampled on now.
The 1950s also marked a period of remarkable versatility for Stewart, who was equally effective in breezy comedies like The Jackpot. And the whimsical Harvey, one of Stewart's personal favorites, was a good fit for a 42-year-old actor making a graceful transition from playing idealistic young men to mature character roles.
I think he fell into those characterizations. He easily adapted to them. I don't think there was a problem for him, mainly because there was never a problem for James Stewart, the actor. James Stewart, the actor, seized on parts.
Stewart, the actor, welcomed the challenge of doing an entire movie in clown makeup for 1952's The Greatest Show on Earth. While making the film, he gave advice to a young Charlton Heston, who had embarrassed himself while shooting his first big scene.
I leaped out of the Jeep bouquet and tripped in the ring curb and fell flat on my face in the sawdust. And Jimmy, who'd been silent till then, he said, "Well, Chuck," he said, "can only get better from here."
In 1953, Jimmy Stewart was juggling career and family concerns once again. His mother had passed away, and his relationship with his father became more protective. Life's experiences had seasoned him as an actor, and even though he was never a matinee idol, the studios continued to offer him strong material.
Is this Helen Berger?
Yes, but there must be some...
What's Glenn?
Glenn? Glenn who?
It's Glenn Miller!
The popular Glenn Miller story showed a Jimmy Stewart adept at character study.
He was truly Glenn Miller.
Now listen to this. Now what? Pennsylvania 6, 5,000. Remember?
Yes.
I had never met Glenn Miller, but when he put those glasses on and he conducted his orchestra and he talked about the sound, I felt that he was Glenn Miller.
But the likable Glenn Miller turned into an obsessive voyeur in 1954's Rear Window, Alfred Hitchcock's latest essay in suspense.
First, I watched them just to kill time, but then I couldn't take my eyes off them, just as you won't be able to.
Hollywood whispered that Stewart would be using his binoculars to get an eyeful of the hypnotically beautiful Grace Kelly. Gloria Stewart insisted, however, that the more glamorous Jimmy's leading ladies, the more attention she got at home.
They lived such rather pristine lives, certainly by Hollywood standards. They were not part of the social set here. They didn't go to parties. They didn't razzmatazz. They became, very respectable, upper-class Beverly Hills people.
In 1956, 48-year-old Jimmy Stewart was at the top of his profession. But while he appeared in popular films like The Spirit of St. Louis and Alfred Hitchcock's The Man Who Knew Too Much, and would continue as a top box office draw into the 1960s, the new decade would see his personal life touched by tragedy.
If I could just find the key, the beginning, and put it together.
If I'm mad, that would explain it, wouldn't it?
Madeline.
Vertigo, Alfred Hitchcock's dark drama of a tormented man's obsession, was the most unlikely of Jimmy Stewart vehicles. Ironically, Jimmy jumped at the chance to play the role.
What you're seeing in Vertigo is an invention on the part of Jimmy Stewart. He liked the concept of this tormented character. And I'm sure he discussed it with Hitchcock, but Hitchcock was never an actor's director. If he realized that the actor could give him what he wanted, he let him go.
While playing men obsessed with dark impulses on screen, as the 1950s edged toward the 1960s, Stewart continued to lead a remarkably unremarkable life off-screen. His war years comfortably behind him, he was now a devoted husband and father, whose conservative politics stood in sharp contrast to those of his best friend, Henry Fonda.
They were as different as you could possibly be. I mean, Henry is a Democrat, Jimmy's a Republican. Henry had more marriages. Jimmy had one marriage and two beautiful daughters, twin daughters. But they were the best of friends.
Stewart and Fonda would spend hours building model airplanes and flying kites, passions they had pursued since their early days in Hollywood.
These two men would sit around, and I'd watch them making these incredible things on a balsa wood and paper, and in 4 hours, maybe say 6 words. I have A27, Dad knew. That goes into B14. That's this is the conversation.
In 1959, Jimmy received the Best Actor nomination for his performance in Anatomy of a Murder. His competition was Charlton Heston.
Jimmy took hold of my elbow and he said, "Chuck, I hope you win." I really mean it. To this day, I can't tell that story without breaking up because he meant it. Extraordinary.
Jimmy got his wish. Heston won the Oscar for Ben-Hur. In 1961, Jimmy Stewart's father, Alex, died of cancer. The 91st Psalm was read at his funeral, the same scripture that Alex had slipped into his son's pocket when Jimmy went off to war.
It was around that time that he took off for the first time in 27, 28 years of working and just had to stop. He had to withdraw. It crushed him. It crushed him a great deal.
When he returned to work, Stewart showed amazing range and undiminished charisma in films like How the West Was Won, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, Mr. Hobbs Takes a Vacation, and Dear Bridget, co-starring a freckled-faced 10-year-old named Billy Mooney.
He immediately made me feel really comfortable, in the relationship of father and son in the film. He played the accordion, so we had these scenes where we played live musically, and we used to kind of jam a little bit. He'd play accordion, and I'd play cello. Even when the cameras weren't rolling, we continued with our jams for a while. That was fun. I liked that a lot.
We're simply a family that happens to love music, wouldn't you say so?
Yes, sir.
Well, that's all that really matters, son. That's all that matters, to love it. And it doesn't matter how many mistakes you make, as long as you've got it here. And you know what this is.
Your shirt.
Dear Bridget featured an appearance by voluptuous screen siren Bridget Bardot, whose off-screen discipline differed markedly from Stewart's.
As nice as she was, and she was great, but whenever she was not absolutely needed and the cameras weren't rolling, she was escorted by her entourage off to her trailer, and she was kept very private away from everything. And Mr. Stewart was always there, just hanging out with everyone else, being a total normal guy.
A Jimmy Stewart movie now had a wistful air of nostalgia to it, with the star aging as gracefully as the characters he played. Turning 60 in 1968, Stewart retired from the Air Force Reserves, having been awarded the rank of Brigadier General.
Thousands of demonstrators opposed to the Vietnam War assembled in the nation's capital for a mass protest.
That same year, anti-Vietnam War protesters were causing Americans to question the small-town values and staunch patriotism Jimmy Stewart held dear. But Stewart's association with the military continued when his stepson, Ronald McLean, became a lieutenant in the U.S. Marines. In support of their son and United States troops, Jimmy and Gloria joined in a USO tour of military bases in the winter of 1969. Hollywood's ambassador shook hands with 12,000 soldiers on the tour, snapped photographs of many more, and promised to call anxious relatives back in the States. Then, just 3 months after the Stewarts visited their son, Lieutenant McLean was struck down by enemy forces.
When the one young man was killed in Vietnam, it was Jimmy's son, and I heard that he was absolutely devastated.
That wounded him greatly, but he also expressed pride in the fact that the son had served and done his duty.
Suddenly, and particularly for Gloria, the spacious house in Beverly Hills seemed haunted by painful memories. Escape from grief came in the form of a job offer Jimmy felt he could not refuse. A revival of Harvey on Broadway with theater legend Helen Hayes. He loved the role and the city that had seen the blossoming of his theater career. Now one of the entertainment industry's elder statesmen, Stewart took on a variety of television and film projects with a powerful personal meaning, such as the HBO movie Right of Way with Bette Davis, which told the story of a senior couple's right to die. Philanthropic causes drew Jimmy's attention and his checkbook. And as Jimmy gave of himself, Hollywood gave back. In 1985, he received an honorary Oscar to celebrate a half-century in show business. President Reagan bestowed upon him America's highest award for artists at the Kennedy Center Honors. Stewart even found time to write a best-selling book of poems, and Gloria inspired him to tour Africa in support of animal rights. But in 1982, the death of Stewart's best friend, Henry Fonda, had forced him to confront his own mortality.
They were really great friends, and when Henry got sick, Jimmy was there almost every day. They were really, really close.
With his children grown and 78 films to his credit, Jimmy felt it might be time to slow down and step out of the spotlight. But his fans were not ready to let him leave. By the 1980s, It's a Wonderful Life had become a television staple at holiday time. Appreciative new audiences revisited the little town of Bedford Falls, thanks in large part to Jimmy Stewart's compelling performance as George Bailey.
To my big brother George, the richest man in town.
Like the character he played in It's a Wonderful Life, Jimmy Stewart had a chance to look back over his own wonderful life, when the town fathers of Indiana, Pennsylvania celebrated their favorite son with a Jimmy Stewart Museum. But no amount of appreciation for Stewart's half-century of movie magic could soften the blow when in 1994 he lost the love of his life. Gloria Stewart died of cancer. They had been married 44 years. Friends remembered Jimmy always felt that Gloria could do no wrong, and never tired of telling her how wonderful she looked.
Everybody was aware and devastated. Devastated because we miss her, and devastated for Jimmy. They were quite wonderful together.
I think a good part of his life stopped. I think the same thing happened to Jimmy that happened to me when my late husband passed away. You just, you can't get started again.
Though Jimmy Stewart took solace in frequent visits from his children and grandchildren, Gloria's death left him with a terrible emptiness. He lived the last few years of his life far from the glare of the spotlight, reflecting in solitude upon his life's journey. On July 2nd, 1997, at his home, he died peacefully in his sleep. He was 89 years old. His fans gathered for outpourings of love and affection. And all Hollywood mourned the loss of an important talent. But the memory of Jimmy Stewart will never fade. The light of his life will forever shine on in repeated screenings of his films, many of which have become American classics. Jimmy Stewart once summed up his work by saying, "I think it's wonderful to have been able to give people little pieces of time they can remember."
Well, Jimmy Stewart really never left that little town in Pennsylvania in terms of its values and what he believed about life and how you should live.
He's not a movie star, and yet he's one of the biggest movie stars we've ever had.
Want me to kiss her, huh?
He's a powerful guy. You listen to him when he talks, not because you have to, because you want to. And it's worth it.
I'm gonna stay right here and fight for this lost cause, even if this room gets filled with lies like these.
He was surely and remains the best liked actor in films. I can't imagine anyone else that would approach that.
He is an icon, and he is an institution. And I think there'd be better people in this world if they'd study Jimmy Stewart.